My truck jerked to the side as both front tires burst at the same time. I grabbed the steering wheel hard, trying not to crash into the ditch. After working for 16 hours straight, all I wanted was to get home and sleep. When I finally stopped the truck, I saw what caused it, sharp metal spikes sticking up from my driveway. And there she was, Karen, hiding behind a tree with her phone out, filming everything with a big smile on her face. "Got you now," she yelled, stepping out with the clipboard she always carried. "This is HOA property, and you've ignored our warning letters for the last time." I got out of my truck, tired in my regular clothes. My uniform and badge were in my bag after working all night. Karen walked toward me with two other HOA board members, all wearing the same Whispering Pines shirts like they were some kind of neighborhood police. "See these?" Karen asked, pointing at the spike strips that just destroyed my $400 tires. "These are what happens when you break the rules. The HOA board voted to stop you from using our private road." I looked closely at the metal spikes welded to iron bars. They had painted them black so they would be hard to see on the gravel road. This wasn't just mean, it was dangerous and against the law. "Did you put these here?" I asked calmly, pulling out my phone to take pictures. "We sure did," Karen said proudly. "Maybe now you'll use the main entrance like everyone else instead of your shortcut through our community property." I nodded slowly, taking pictures of the spikes, my ruined tires and Karen's smiling face. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out my sheriff's badge. "Elaine Winters, as county sheriff, I'm placing you under arrest for destroying property, creating a dangerous road hazard, and setting an illegal trap." Her smile disappeared instantly. Her phone almost fell from her hand as her mouth dropped open in shock. You're the sheriff?" she stammered, staring at my badge like it was a snake. "Yes, ma'am. Have been for 8 years now." I smiled a little. "Which means you just destroyed a county vehicle while breaking several laws." Tim, the HOA vice president, took a quick step back. "We didn't know. That I'm the sheriff? Or that what you did was illegal?" I pulled out my handcuffs slowly. "Not knowing either won't help you in court." The color drained from Karen's face as she finally realized what she had done. The neighborhood bully who thought HOA rules were more important than real laws was about to learn a very expensive lesson. This is the story of how the woman who terrorized our neighborhood with silly rules and fines found out that real laws have real consequences, especially when you mess with the wrong driveway. My name is Mike Holloway and I've been the Cedar County Sheriff for 8 years. I bought my grandfather's old house on the edge of town 5 years ago. It's a small ranch house on 3 acres of land with a gravel driveway that connects to the main road. The problem started 3 years ago when developers built the Whispering Pines neighborhood next to my property. My driveway cuts through a small corner of what became their land, but I have legal permission, called an easement, to use it. This easement was written into the property papers long before Whispering Pines existed. But that didn't stop Karen Winters, the HOA president, from trying to force me to drive an extra mile around to their main entrance instead. For 2 years I got warning letters, fake fines and angry visits about my trespassing. I showed them my legal papers every time, but Karen wouldn't listen. She just wanted to win. That morning, after Karen's shocked face registered who I really was, I called my deputy Mark Wilson to come to the scene. I didn't arrest Karen right away. I wanted everything done perfectly by the book. No one could claim I was abusing my power over a personal dispute. "You can't arrest me for protecting HOA property," Karen said, finding her voice again. "We have the right to secure our private roads." "What you don't have the right to do," I explained calmly while waiting for my deputy, "is set dangerous traps designed to damage vehicles or hurt people. That's against state law, regardless of whose property it's on." "These aren't traps," Tim argued weakly. "They're security devices. That you painted black to hide them on a dark gravel road?" I shook my head. "A security device would be a gate with a sign. This is a booby trap and it's illegal." My deputy arrived 10 minutes later. I had him take official pictures and statements from everyone present. Karen kept insisting they had the right to protect community property from trespassers, but her voice had lost its usual confidence. "Am I really being arrested?" she asked when Wilson took out his notepad. "Right now we're just documenting the incident," I said. "But yes, there will be charges filed. Destroying county property alone is a serious offense." As Deputy Wilson helped me fill out the paperwork, more neighbors started coming out of their houses, curious about the sheriff's vehicle and flashing lights. Karen's face turned red with embarrassment as people gathered, pointing and whispering. "Sheriff, can I speak to you privately?" she asked, her voice suddenly much softer. I nodded and we stepped a few feet away from the others. "Look, this has clearly been a misunderstanding," she said quickly. The board approved security measures but not specifically these devices. Perhaps we can resolve this without formal charges? The HOA would be happy to pay for your tire damage. I looked at her carefully. A misunderstanding? You were just bragging about installing these spike strips. You were filming my reaction when my tires blew out. Her eyes darted around nervously. I misspoke in the heat of the moment. We never intended to cause damage or create a hazard. Elaine, I said firmly, you're on video saying exactly what your intentions were. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a deliberate act that could have caused a serious accident. What if a car with children inside had hit these? Or what if an ambulance needed to reach my house in an emergency? For the first time since I'd known her, Karen looked genuinely worried. Not about the neighborhood or property values but about herself. Deputy Wilson finished documenting the scene and called a tow truck for my vehicle. I decided not to handcuff Karen, but I did inform her that she needed to come to the station to give a formal statement. What about my car? She asked, pointing to her white SUV parked at the edge of the neighborhood entrance. You can have someone pick it up later, I replied. Right now you're coming with us. As we drove to the station, Karen sat silently in the back seat, staring out the window. The neighborhood power player who had terrorized residents with clipboard in hand now looked small and frightened. At the station, I had Wilson process her statement while I called the county prosecutor, Jane Martinez. Spike strips. Jane repeated after I explained the situation. On a residential driveway? Please tell me you're joking. I wish I were, I replied. I've got the destroyed county vehicle, photographs, video evidence of her admitting to it and multiple witnesses. How well do you know this HOA president? Jane asked cautiously. I understood her concern. We've had multiple disputes about my easement, all documented. But I'm handling this by the book, had my deputy take the lead on processing, and I'm calling you before making any charging decisions. Good, Jane said. The last thing we need is accusations of you abusing your position. Send me all the evidence and I'll review it immediately. In the meantime, book her on criminal mischief and reckless endangerment. We can add more charges later if appropriate. After hanging up, I went to check on Karen. She had given her statement and was waiting in our small interview room, a paper cup of water in front of her. The prosecutor is reviewing the case, I told her, sitting down across the table. In the meantime, you're being charged with criminal mischief and reckless endangerment. This is ridiculous, she said, but without her usual fire. I was protecting the community. From what, Elaine? From me using a legal easement that's been there for 40 years. She looked down at her perfectly manicured nails. You don't understand. Property values depend on uniformity, on everyone following the same rules. Your situation disrupts that. My situation? Your grandfather's old house doesn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. You're using a private back entrance instead of coming through the main gate like everyone else creates security concerns. The board has received complaints. I leaned forward. Let me guess, all those complaints came from you? She didn't answer, which told me everything. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You'll be processed and released on your own recognizance since you're not a flight risk. The prosecutor will decide what formal charges to file. In the meantime, I suggest you hire a lawyer and remove those spike strips immediately. Karen nodded silently, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. News travels fast in small towns. By the next morning, everyone in Whispering Pines knew that their HOA president had been arrested for putting spike strips on the sheriff's driveway. My phone started ringing early with calls from reporters and concerned citizens. I issued a brief statement explaining that there was an ongoing investigation into dangerous devices placed on a legal easement, and that the county prosecutor would be handling the case to avoid any conflict of interest. Around 10 a.m., my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found Fred Kowalski, the HOA treasurer, standing on my porch looking uncomfortable. Sheriff Holloway, I need to speak with you, he said, nervously adjusting his glasses. It's about yesterday's incident. I invited him in and we sat in my living room. First, I want to apologize, Fred began. The board never authorized spike strips or anything that could cause damage or harm. We discussed a gate with a keypad, something visible and safe. Then why were they installed? I asked. Fred sighed deeply. Karen has been taking liberties with board decisions for some time. She often implements her own interpretation of what we vote on. Many of us have been afraid to challenge her. Afraid? Of what? She's vindictive, Fred explained. Challenge her, and suddenly your flower beds are in violation, or your paint color needs to be redone, or your holiday decorations are too bright. She's forced 3 families to move in the last year alone through targeted enforcement. This was interesting. So the board didn't specifically approve these spike strips? Absolutely not, Fred said firmly. We approved access control measures that would be visible, legal, and safe. That's the exact wording in our minutes. What she did was completely unauthorized. I took notes as Fred spoke. This would be important for the prosecutor to know. There's more, Fred continued, lowering his voice despite us being alone. Karen's brother-in-law owns Secure Home Perimeters, the company that installed those spike strips. They've gotten all the HOA security contracts since she became president. Always without competitive bidding. Now things were making more sense. This wasn't just about power, it was about money. Do you have documentation of these contracts? Fred nodded. I brought copies of everything. The board is meeting tonight to discuss removing her as president. Most members had no idea how far this had gone until her arrest. After Fred left, I called Jane Martinez to share the new information. She was particularly interested in the unauthorized contracts and potential financial impropriety. This changes things, Jane said. We may be looking at fraud and misuse of HOA funds in addition to the original charges. I'll need to speak with this treasurer and review those documents. He mentioned they're voting to remove her tonight, I added. Good, Jane replied. The more distance they put between the HOA and Karen's actions, the clearer it becomes that this was her personal vendetta, not official HOA business. That evening, I received a call from Deputy Wilson, who had been monitoring the situation at the Whispering Pines Community Center where the emergency HOA meeting was taking place. Sheriff, you might want to come down here, Wilson said. Things are getting heated and Karen's making some pretty serious accusations against you. I drove to the community center, parking my personal vehicle rather than my patrol car to maintain a low profile. I slipped in the back of the packed meeting room just as Karen was addressing the crowd. Sheriff Holloway has been waging a personal campaign against me and this HOA for years, she was saying, her voice rising dramatically. He refuses to comply with our community standards, and now he's using his position to intimidate and persecute me for simply doing my job. Several residents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others nodded in agreement. The community was clearly divided. Fred stood up from the board table. Karen, the board never authorized spike strips. You acted without approval, and you hired your brother-in-law's company without competitive bidding. That's a clear violation of our bylaws. Karen waved dismissively. Emergency security measures don't require bidding. And I didn't specifically ask for spike strips, I just told them we needed effective access control. An older woman in the front row raised her hand. When recognized, she stood shakily, leaning on her cane. I've lived here since this development was built. I've received 16 violation notices in the past year, all signed by Karen. My late husband was a lawyer and I've looked at our HOA rules. Half these violations aren't even in our bylaws, she's making them up. Murmurs spread through the room. Another resident stood up, a young father I recognized from the local hardware store. My daughter's bike was on our driveway for less than 5 minutes while she ran inside for water, and we got a $150 fine. When I tried to appeal it, Karen said the fine would double if I didn't pay immediately. More residents began sharing similar stories: excessive fines, selective enforcement, personal vendettas against anyone who questioned Karen's authority. The meeting was quickly turning into a public reckoning. Karen tried to regain control, banging her gavel loudly. These complaints are not on the agenda. We're here to discuss the sheriff's abuse of power in having me arrested. Actually, Fred interrupted, the agenda is to vote on removing you as president for unauthorized actions that have exposed the HOA to legal liability. Karen's face reddened. You can't remove me. I've increased property values by 15% through strict standards enforcement. You've increased misery by 100%, someone called from the back, drawing nervous laughter. At that point, Karen noticed me standing at the back of the room. And look who's here. The sheriff himself, coming to intimidate everyone into voting against me. This is a private HOA meeting, you have no right to be here. I stepped forward calmly. Actually, Elaine, I'm a resident who received proper notice of this meeting, just like everyone else. I'm not here as sheriff, I'm here as a neighbor. The room fell silent as I walked to the front, deliberately leaving my jacket on to cover my badge and gun, emphasizing I wasn't there in an official capacity. I've stayed quiet for 3 years while receiving dozens of bogus violation notices. I've politely shown my legal easement documentation repeatedly. I've watched good neighbors move away rather than deal with increasingly arbitrary rules. But when someone puts dangerous devices on a road that could have injured or killed someone, that crosses a line from HOA overreach into criminal behavior. Karen tried to interrupt, but Fred raised his hand to stop her. Sheriff, Mr. Holloway, Fred corrected himself, would you be willing to share with everyone exactly what happened yesterday? I described finding the spike strips, the confrontation with Karen and her admission of installing them, and the potential dangers such devices pose to anyone driving on that road: delivery drivers, visitors, emergency vehicles. When I finished, Karen stood up, pointing an accusing finger at me. He's lying. We put up clear warning signs. And it's our private road. Tim, the vice president who had been with Karen during the incident, surprisingly spoke up. No, Karen, we didn't put up any warnings. And I was there. You admitted to installing them specifically to catch Sheriff Holloway using the road. ET2 Tim? Karen spat, grabbing her purse. This is a witch hunt and I won't stand for it. I resign effective immediately. Good luck maintaining property values without me. With that, she stormed out of the meeting, leaving stunned silence in her wake. Fred cleared his throat. Well, I guess that simplifies our vote. Now, shall we discuss forming a committee to review all outstanding violations and fines? The meeting continued more productively after Karen's dramatic exit. The remaining board members voted to hire an independent auditor to review all HOA finances, especially contracts with vendors. They also established a new appeals process for violations and created a committee to review and simplify the community guidelines. Several residents approached me afterwards, sharing stories of Karen's reign of terror and apologizing for not standing up sooner. I assured them that my focus was on the dangerous spike strips, not on HOA politics. Over the next week, the full extent of Karen's mismanagement came to light. The independent auditor discovered that Secure Home Perimeters had received over $120,000 in contracts over the past 3 years, all without competitive bidding. Karen's brother-in-law had then subcontracted the actual work to cheaper providers, pocketing the difference. The prosecutor added fraud charges to Karen's case, and her brother-in-law was also charged with conspiracy and contractor fraud. The spike strips had opened a much bigger can of worms than anyone expected. Karen hired an expensive lawyer from the city who tried to argue that the spike strips were legal security devices on private property. But faced with mounting evidence of financial impropriety and the clear danger the devices posed, he advised her to take a plea deal. In the end, Karen pled guilty to criminal mischief, reckless endangerment, and misappropriation of HOA funds. She received 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and to the county for the damage to my patrol vehicle. She was also banned from serving on any HOA board for 10 years. The most satisfying part wasn't the legal punishment, though. It was the transformation of Whispering Pines after Karen's departure. The new board, led by Fred, rewrote the community guidelines to be clear, reasonable, and fairly enforced. The atmosphere in the neighborhood changed from fear and suspicion to friendly cooperation. They even installed a proper gate at the entrance to my easement, one with a keypad for emergency services and clear markings visible from the road. They gave me the access code as a gesture of goodwill, though I had no legal obligation to use it. 3 months after the spike strip incident, Whispering Pines held its first community barbecue. I was surprised to receive an invitation, given the history of tension between me and the HOA. When I arrived, Fred welcomed me warmly. "Sheriff, Mike, we're glad you came," he said, handing me a burger. "We wanted to officially apologize for everything that happened and thank you for handling it professionally." "No need for thanks," I replied. "Just doing my job." "Well, your job helped us clean house and create the community we actually wanted to live in," Fred said. Karen was a tyrant, but we were all too intimidated to stand up to her until she crossed a line with those spike strips. As I mingled with my neighbors, many for the first time despite living near them for years, I realized something important. Communities aren't built through rigid rules and harsh penalties. They're built through understanding, compromise, and mutual respect. Karen had tried to force conformity through fear and intimidation. All she'd accomplished was creating resentment and division. Now that she was gone, real community was finally growing in Whispering Pines. I saw Karen once more about 6 months later. She was doing her community service, picking up trash along the highway in an orange vest. Our eyes met briefly as I drove past in my patrol car. I gave her a small nod, not gloating, just acknowledging her. She quickly looked away, her face flushed with embarrassment. I felt no satisfaction in her humiliation, only hope that she was learning the same lesson the rest of us had. Real authority doesn't come from titles or clipboards or threats. It comes from earning respect and using power responsibly. As for the infamous spike strips, they're now mounted on the wall at the sheriff's office with a small plaque that reads, "Always be sure who you're dealing with before setting a trap." It's become something of a local legend and a powerful reminder that no HOA stands above the law. And my driveway? It's now the smoothest gravel road in the county, recently regraded courtesy of Whispering Pines HOA as part of their good neighbor policy. Sometimes justice has a way of working itself out, especially in small towns where everyone eventually learns who their real neighbors are.